Welcome everyone. Thank you first of all to the Revolution Report, to Slava, to Don of course who couldn't be with us. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. I think it's really important to get together, to continue to talk, to have dialogue, and to continue to build. I think that's very critical now. And also thanks to Eddie for the kind words that he mentioned during his speech. So my talk today is about what's going on campuses, how that relates to censorship, how that relates to various aspects of what we really see now as a police state as it relates to Palestine. And for those who don't know, my name is Christopher Helali. I'm the International Secretary of the Party of Communists USA. I'm also the Secretary of the Vermont National Lawyers Guild, where I do a lot of legal observing and legal aid for those especially now involved in arrests or somehow legal proceedings related to activism for Palestine. I'm also a social studies teacher, and I am a law school student, asynchronous at Cornell Law School. So right now, what I will be discussing, of course, is primarily my experiences. I was a legal observer. I've been very active in the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, and before that, Vermonters for Justice in Palestine, where we had the first major BDS victory, which was Ben and Jerry's divesting and leaving Israel. And that was, of course, one of the first and major corporations that ended up leaving. And that was a few years back. Now, of course, as we've seen since October 7th, there has been tremendous upsurge of momentum and solidarity for the Palestinian liberation struggle. Unlike anything that I've ever seen, and I was back in Students for Justice in Palestine from 2007 to 2011 when I was in college, I have not seen this level of enthusiasm, activism, people on the streets by not thousands or tens of thousands, by millions on the streets. And not only in the United States, but around the world. And it has been something not only inspiring, but also deeply humbling to see the world stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people in the face of genocide. Of course, the flip side of that is that the powers that be, those that are allies to the genocidal state of Israel, to the apartheid state of Israel, those that continue to arm, to fund, and to support the Zionist policy, they of course have done the full tactics of an enemy state to ensure that Palestinian activism doesn't bear any fruit, and that everyone who does speak out and does stand up and does pitch a tent is punished to the maximum, basically the letter of the law, as much as they can, whether they kick them out of their schools, whether they ostracize them, whether they cut opportunities for jobs and grants and funding. We've seen it all. And so I think it's really important now to speak about this and to kind of do reflection, because now we're in the graduation season. A lot of universities have already had their graduations. A lot of students, most of the encampments, if not all of them now, are done. They've been taken down. And what can we learn from this period of time going forward? So this is an image that I took at Dartmouth College just about a month and a half ago, where we had probably the shortest encampment of any. Dartmouth College, for those who don't know, is an Ivy League school in New Hampshire. It's probably one of the most conservative Ivy League schools historically. Dinesh D'Souza and a whole bunch of Fox commentators are graduates of Dartmouth College. Its origin is converting indigenous people to Christianity. Its logo has two indigenous people reading the Bible and going to the main chapel. So that is, that's the school's origin. And so it attracts a certain type of person. And so Dartmouth had an encampment that went up at 6 o'clock and was down by 9:30. So that's all it lasted. Now, it didn't come down as we had anticipated, with local police, with, who knows, the county sheriff and the local Hanover police, maybe the Lebanon police and a couple other police from the surrounding towns and cities. No, the president, who has become so forceful against anything related to Palestine and so pro-Zionist, called out the Special Operations Division of the New Hampshire State Police. There they are. When they came, we were shocked. I said, the stormtroopers have arrived, Here they are. And of course, we started to, as legal observers, we started to look at the situation, to monitor. Student liaisons, police liaisons came to us and I was lead of one of the teams trying to figure out what to do, how to protect themselves, and I simply said to remain calm, to remain cool, to not engage, to not give any sort of leeway to the police to enact even more violence against them, right? They were making a political statement, and that's what was needed. Not to escalate it to the point where they now have other additional charges like resisting arrest and so on and so forth. Maybe even assault on an officer, things like that. So, of course, as we started to monitor the situation, for those who can tell, the pointer actually is pointed at something very interesting here that I noticed, and I think I'm the only one who took a picture of it. But that is the same type of weapon that's used to launch grenades. It's a grenade launcher, basically. It's been repurposed here to launch tear gas, right? But this is a military-grade weapon. Mind you, the encampment was all of 4 tents. 4 tents. 4 tents, 90 students. That's it. And this was the response that we had. Not only that, so now we had militarized police, special unit of the state police with batons, with advanced weaponry, with automatic weapons that we saw. They also brought in armored vehicles. And that's right in front of Baker Library, which is the historic library of Dartmouth College. And they had armored vehicles there. And we said, this is where a lot of that surplus military equipment is going. There it is. It probably was driving down some street in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and now it's brought back, repainted for police, and there you go. Mind you, this is a town that is extremely wealthy, a quiet town, New England town, 98% white, in terms of the whole area. Never any crime. Police don't even do much of anything. Maybe, somebody hits a deer and they go out there and take a look, or somebody slips on the ice. But this was the response of the university. Above this, there were drones. The police deployed drones. They had multiple drones circling around, monitoring the situation, giving accurate information. It was unbelievable what was going on. So I have some videos here. I don't know if we have sound though. I don't know if we have sound. At least you can kind of take a look at sort of the standoff here, and you can see they have now taken, and now they're bringing in the vans for those who are going to be arrested, right? They're bringing in the vans. They're bringing in university vans, not even police vans. They repurposed the vans from the outdoor club. This is the club that does hiking and camping in Vermont and New Hampshire. They took over their vans because they didn't have enough police vehicles to take out all the people who were just, look at them. Does this look like a terrorist group? This is a bunch of students, old ladies, Jewish people, holding hands, singing hymns. That's all they were doing, right? And this is the standoff that was happening at that time. And I'm going to fast forward to, I think, what is the most important event of this night, which got national attention. You'll see it over in the corner here. Right now in the back, boom, there falls Professor Annalise Orlick. And I'm the only one who got it from this vantage point that has posted now. She goes up to the police. She says, "How dare you? Look at her." They grab her, and eventually they throw her down and beat her up. By the way, she's head of Jewish studies. She's a historian, tenured professor, and this is how she was treated. Her students went to her defense. Some students and journalists went to her defense. They were also taken in as well. And this was huge news. This was all over New York Times. She went on Democracy Now! And things like that. But just so you can see, and of course this yellow hat, for those who don't know, or kind of like neon hat, is the legal observer hat. That's what we wear to identify ourselves. But you see this kind of violence. I mean, look in the back, dragging, beating. It was unbelievable for this kind of stuff. It was absolutely horrifying for us. And then of course, at the end, they started to clear the streets with this, we call it the goon line. They were kind of pushing this, and they were all going in unison, push, this kind of stuff, and they were pushing us all down. We were monitoring them, and eventually, of course, they pushed us all the way down off of the green. Now, the green is a campus space, but it's supposed to be a common space, right? It's a classic New England town. This was the idea of the common space. At Harvard, you can still bring a cow, and they can feed on the green, which one professor has done. But here at Dartmouth, it's supposed to be for everybody. She said, nope, nobody can use it, including some poor person who was visiting their parents who accidentally cut across the green because they were trying to get somewhere else on campus, and the police grabbed them, broke their I think a collarbone, or broke one of their bones, and it dragged them down. It was like a 50-something 50-year-old. and they grabbed him, dragged him, and beat him up. And it was unbelievable. He said, I'm not even a part of this. I was just going to visit my father, you know? So that's so you can kind of gauge the situation. It was a really unbelievable situation. And of course, this is what has been playing around throughout this time period. So, we've really seen something unique since October 7th. And I really think that we have to now, in the midst of the genocide still, we have to think about how we continue to advance and to build for Palestine, and how we continue to advance the Palestinian struggle, right? While campuses are closed now and people have gone home and students have now left their dorms, we have to continue. The Palestinian people are still dying. Right now as we speak, there's ongoing operations happening. There's bombardment going on. There's encirclement. People are getting arrested. People are getting tortured. People are being killed. So we have to continue to advance the Palestinian struggle. But how? How do we do it? First and foremost, I think that it's important to think about the key aspects of the Palestinian liberation struggle, because I think that these have been muddled. There's been a lot of debate. Where are we? What are we doing? What are we calling for? Ceasefire? We're calling for no ceasefire, 2-state, 1-state, no state, democratic confederalism. Who knows what people are saying these days, right? So I think the first thing is to really talk about boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS. BDS movement comes from within Palestinian civil society, if you'd like to use that. It comes from that kind of a group of activists who are now looking for non-violent ways of resistance that can speak to the conscience of those who enact violence. Of course, we remember the famous quote by Kwame Ture, right? Stokely Carmichael, that in order for your enemy to really be moved, they have to have a conscience, and the United States has none, right? So when thinking about that, this is a movement for consciousness of people, of states, of organizations to divest from Israeli companies, to divest from Israeli bonds and financial instruments, which, by the way, how many of you work in a union? How many of you get a pension or will have a pension if you continue, right? How many of you have a 401k plan, right? So when we start to look at the investments, and we've analyzed them in Vermont, we've done it now in New Hampshire, and we've realized that some of our pension funds have gone into Israeli bonds, the Israeli shekel, so buying currency, which is what a lot of diversification of portfolios is part of the fiduciary responsibility of pension funds and different corporations to ensure that they have a good return. They'll buy various countries' currency and bonds to ensure that they continue to have good growth. And of course, Israel is one of those countries that they do this. And now we are calling on Vermont and many other, and every state really, to divest from those bonds, from the Israeli currency, and also from Israeli companies, some of which are intimately tied with the apartheid regime, with the ongoing military occupation, and now with the genocide. Be they military, be they surveillance and technological companies, be they companies that work with settlers to help build infrastructure. I mean, we might think of a company like Caterpillar, right, as somehow, oh, well, they don't, no. All of the bulldozers, backhoes, all of this heavy equipment is used not only to destroy homes, but to build illegal settlements in violation of international law, right? This is criminal, right? And it deserves our attention, and it deserves to be at the top of the priority list here, right? So the additional thing that I focus on, especially being an educator, being an academic, is to cut ties with Israeli universities, right? Not out of hate for my colleagues, some of whom they are advocating also for an end to the occupation and things like that, but primarily to put pressure on the state of Israel, primarily to put pressure and to ostracize them everywhere they go, just like what happened in South Africa, right? And of course, the big elephant in the room is identifying, boycotting, and divesting from US companies that are intimately tied with the ongoing military occupation, and of course that supply Israel with the arms produced by our military-industrial complex, right? So for those who don't know, I was part of an independent task force that produced around a 90-page, 100-page paper that went to President Biden and to the Secretary of State at the Department of State that highlighted all of the uses of U.S. supplied and U.S. manufactured weapons in this war in violation of National Security Memorandum 20, which was passed by Joe Biden and basically called for a review of the weapons shipments and of our military supplies to ensure that they were not being used to target civilians or to target civilian infrastructure or to kill journalists, right? But they were, and we documented. It's extremely well documented, and you can go and check it out. I worked alongside Josh Paul, who many of you might know. He was one of the highest State Department officials to officially resign and was part of our task force as one of the leaders, and Professor Noor Erakat at Rutgers University and Rutgers Law School, who is the preeminent Palestinian scholar on international law questions here in the US. So, when looking at that, now you have to realize you have to bring it to the people of the United States and say, but here it is. You know, Israel does not manufacture 2,000-pound bombs. They manufacture some components of the 2,000-pound bombs, but they're supplied by the US. They're supplied from here, and they get additional technical instruments and modifications when they get to Israel. And then Israel uses US aircraft, F-16s, F-22s, F-35s, other platforms, right? Be they helicopters or other larger planes, to use and drop these munitions, right? That all intimately ties the United States into these crimes, right? In violation of our own law. So even just simply talking, as many of the students have done at the universities, and especially at Dartmouth, where they said, but this university receives defense funding. This university receives grants from the Department of Defense, from different, different arms of the government, from DARPA for some professors in their research, right? Especially in technology and computer science, in AI, they receive funding for this stuff, absolutely, right? But when you start to bring that stuff up, they said, we can't go there, right? You can't touch that. It's a sacred calf. You can't, any mention of that, and you are persona non grata, right? Somehow you have violated core tenets of the university's power and structure, right? But that actually is where we should go. We should go to all the ties that these different universities have with the military-industrial complex. So don't forget, these intellectuals, these engineers, these scientists, these technicians, all come at the top levels from these universities. They come from the Harvards, the MITs, the Stanfords, the Caltechs, and so on and so forth. So they have tied with this genocide. And that has to continue to be exposed. And that's what a lot of student groups are doing and activist groups are doing now, is really trying to delve in, trying to, if they can, FOIA, right, Freedom of Information Act, trying to reveal as much as they can, trying to create instruments and structures for transparency. Because a lot of the universities, even though they talk a big game about human rights, democracy, and so on, they are not transparent institutions, right? Their board of trustees, their directors, their executive committees lock in all that information. Why? They don't want the public knowing. Do you know how much Dartmouth has? Billions of dollars in endowment. Billions of dollars. Cornell, Harvard, Princeton. We're talking about, at the total of all the Ivy League schools, it's $100 billion plus dollars. $100 billion is a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And so when you look at that, you realize how the web of relations here. And I think that that's really key to understand. Of course, at the beginning of the genocide, and still to today, people are calling for a ceasefire. And a ceasefire is a good thing to call for. We call for a ceasefire. Hamas calls for a ceasefire too. But the way in which some groups have called for a ceasefire is interesting and should be analyzed. Some have called for temporary ceasefires for humanitarian aid, for a cessation of the conflict, to exchange some prisoners, and then back to fighting. And we'll talk about another ceasefire. But that's not the kind of ceasefire we want. We want a permanent and lasting ceasefire, which includes an end to the military occupation, right? But not everybody's calling for that. And I think that it's important to recognize the diversity within the Palestinian liberation movement, which I will discuss towards the end, which I think is important for us to analyze here. I think many of us are on the same wavelength on a lot of issues. And so we need to understand what other groups, other political forces within the Palestine Solidarity movement, who might not necessarily call for full liberation for Palestine, what they think about ceasefire, or even what anti-apartheid means, or what an end to the military occupation means, or what a Palestinian state means, right? These are all things to investigate. Of course, there have been violent occupations within schools, violent in quotation marks, because they're nothing compared to what happened in the 60s and 70s, right? I mean, people now are looking at broken windows at Columbia as if the kids had taken up arms like the Black Panther Party or the Black Liberation Army and got in and occupied federal buildings. Yeah, they broke a window and entered the building. Big deal, right? But the response was overwhelming, just like at Dartmouth, right? And I think that in analyzing the repression that we've seen at Columbia, at Yale, and other schools, right, is really important to understand that as we move forward, the repression is only going to increase. Because I think now the mechanisms of the state realize that the Palestine Solidarity Movement has reached a critical mass, and it has reached a critical mass with different political perspectives. And that is extremely dangerous for the ruling class. They see that as a direct threat on their power, on the stability which provides their wealth and their lifestyle, right? If that erodes, you will see them lash out like a cornered animal, right? And that's what they have been doing, right? And of course, castigating the Palestine Liberation Movement and its struggle here as pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iran, as receiving funding. We just had, of course, another report coming out from these pro-Western, pro-NATO journalists saying that Wyatt Reed and others at the Gray Zone, right? We're taking money from Iran. We're taking money from Russia, right? These are coming out all the time. They're going after Jackson Hinkle. They're going after Haas. They're going after many of our comrades. They're going after us in our workplaces, right? Simply for calling out a genocide, simply for standing with people resisting. For me, if the Warsaw Ghetto comrades are seen as a resistance force that we commemorate today, that we look to as a symbol of justice, as a symbol of liberation, as a symbol of struggle against fascism, so too the resistance of the Palestinians, regardless of the political perspectives, has to be seen in the same light. It's ultimately their resistance. I'm not fighting. If I was Palestinian, I'd be fighting. I'm not Palestinian, but it's up to them. I'll support them in their struggle. I'll support them. They need support. And that's how we have to look at it. There's nothing illegal about supporting them. I'm not providing the Kalashnikovs. Other bigger powers are providing the arms, right? But I provide my voice. And my voice is that they have a right to resist. They have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to defend their homeland, their families. As a father, I cannot see images of these kids anymore. I can't see. Every time I see an image, I go up, I kiss my kids. I hold them in bed, they're asleep. Because I say, it could be us. It could be us. It's just by circumstance, by chance, by some miracle of the universe that we're not in that situation. And so how could I live and say that somehow my kids can live peacefully and I can go on my daily life without thinking about the suffering that they're experiencing? We have to be involved. We have to be active. They're not only asking us, they're pleading with us. They're begging us on their knees. We talk to our Palestinian comrades. Anything you can do, don't stop talking about Palestine. And that's, I think, critical. That's what's so important about what's going on right now. And that's what's so important with the work of so many in this room and so many of our comrades outside of this room who continue to do the good work everywhere where they're at. And our allies and our comrades around the world, right, who continue to advocate this. It's critical. It's necessary, right? Additional activism that is going on right now includes humanitarian relief. We have comrades who are on the ground in Gaza who are doing medical. For any of you who are medical personnel, nurses, doctors, physician assistants, whatever you might be, there are opportunities to go to Gaza. There are opportunities to go to the region to continue to help, right, in humanitarian missions. And of course, we had the flotilla to Gaza. You know, regrettably, it was canceled because the flag was taken by Guinea-Bissau off the boats. But I think it's important that there be a diversity of tactics in struggling for Palestine and for Palestinian liberation. And that all of these things are important and components. Whether it's in our trade unions, advocating for different resolutions, bringing up Palestine, not letting Palestine not be on the table, right? whether it's in our political parties, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in our communities and our organizations that we work in, wherever it might be, we have to continue to struggle. And of course, I cannot stop without speaking about the different coalitions that have emerged within this genocide, which are unbelievable. And that is our anti-Zionist Jewish comrades, some of them very ideologically perfect on the issue and on their own political perspective of what they want in the world. And we have, of course, our comrades and friends in Jewish Voice for Peace. We have a coalition of religious groups, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, by diverse groups, Buddhist, they've all come together for this kind of stuff. Ethnic, liberal, progressive, socialist, anti-war, communist, anti-imperialist, they've all come together on these issues. And that's a good thing. However, they've come together on the big issues, but there are still differences on the details. And that's where I'm going to end today, is talking about the details. And I think that it's important to air out what's going on. And I won't stop organizing with the comrades and friends of mine who have different positions on a lot of other issues, but I think it's important to continue to think about the lines of demarcations on all of these issues in order to prepare for the day after, because we'll still be on the front lines the day after. The contradictions of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement in the United States and the Palestinian Solidarity Movement globally, some do not extend to the axis of resistance, right? They might extend to the Palestinian people as a whole. They might be qualified as Palestinian civilians, but they are not necessarily fully extended to the axis of resistance that organizes and fights under a united front, right? And we think here of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, all the different various groups in Syria, right? We think about in Yemen, right? Ansar Allah. We think about Iran. We think about Hashd-Shabi and all of the groups in Iraq, right? So we have all of this coalition of forces and others in the region that have come together under the banner of anti-imperialism, anti-Zionism, right? And of course, there are many of us, I think, in this room who support that, but there are many more out there who do not, who see different perspectives about how to treat each of these various actors, right? And not only the axis of resistance includes the organizations I mentioned, which might have a more Islamic bent, but also secular and communist forces, the PFLP, the DFLP, various other groups within Syria, within Lebanon, communist parties and formations, right? Druze, Alawite, variety of organizations that have taken up arms. And I think that that's very important to think about. So simultaneously in our movement, you might have somebody who says, I'm with the Palestinian people, I'm with them 100%, I condemn Hamas, I condemn Hezbollah, I condemn all of these groups, I condemn Iran as a fascist state, right? And so on and so forth. So I think that, I think we've seen it. So we've even had some of our Muslim brothers and sisters condemn Syria, speaking of the plight of the people in Idlib, right? Idlib being the place where the jihadist forces are there, you know, Free Syrian Army, and also the remnants of Al-Nusra and these kinds of groups, and who are supported by the West, who are now under basically sort of a relationship, a feudal relationship with Turkey, right? That basically exercises control over sovereign Syrian territory, right? Some accuse Ansar Allah in Yemen of killing homosexuals and things like that. We've seen all of these propaganda pieces that have come out in this way. And notably, Palestinian solidarity, especially where I am, is divided on Iran. And especially after the flare-up with Iran and Israel, many continue to say that Iran is an oppressive, authoritarian, theocratic country that oppresses women. So simultaneously, they said free Palestine and women like freedom. Oh, interesting. For interesting to combine all of this stuff together. But even more bizarre, for us, I think, and for me in particular, is the Palestinian solidarity that advocates for anti-imperialism and an end to the military-industrial complex and its funding of Israel, while in the next breath saying we must continue to support and arm Ukraine as much as possible in its just struggle against Russian imperialism. Hold on a second. Didn't you just say you're anti-imperialist and you are against the military-industrial complex? So on one side you want the US to withdraw aid and weaponry. On the other side you want the US to give more aid and weaponry. It doesn't make sense. It's ideological confusion. It's all over the place. Really, they're ideological mercenaries in a way. They're just going for whichever event they are really interested in. And there are those who support Palestine and Ukraine, so-called socialists, many of them Trotskyists, some communists, who are referred to by our Chinese comrades who have made this very interesting. I'm sure you've seen that XY graph that has the different flags and where they line up, right? Under the category of this anti-warism. Of course, I like to say that they're anarcho-NATOists and anarcho-Bidenists. So that's that camp. They are very much with Palestine and Ukraine. Those of us, I think, that support Palestine and Russia are in the category of really dedicated anti-imperialists, those who really understand international relations, those who have a grasp of what's going on, the material conditions in the world, and in that way we have come to a correct material analysis. Both of the situation in Eastern Europe, the situation in the Levant, in the Middle East, and also the situation in China, in the Pacific, in Korea, and Latin America, and in Africa, in the Sahel, right? We have understood this all as a web of relations related to US-EU NATO imperialism and its tentacles reaching out, right? The last two that I find very, bizarre, of course, is those who support Russia and Israel, which is very interesting. The Chinese have this category translated loosely social Darwinism, but it really is some evangelical Christians and some of those who like Israel for the Christian messianism and like Russia for the Orthodox Christianity, and have this very strange blend. They're a minority, but they exist out there. And then, of course, those who support Ukraine and Israel. I actually, outside of my road, going up to our house and our farm, there is a person who has, those signs that we've seen, the science is real, Black Lives Matter, all of this stuff. They have a sign, and it's half Ukraine flag, half Israel flag. What's going on in the world? But simultaneously they put out science is real, Black Lives Matter, Ukraine, Israel, and then they put up oh no, it's the same old for 2024 election. And I'm like, this person is just out of their minds. So, to conclude, our tasks, people committed, I believe, to building a real communist movement, to advancing Marxism-Leninism as an immortal science, is to continue to identify aspects of the movement that can be strengthened, those parts of the movement that continue to need to be criticized, exposed, debated, challenged on their positions, and to unceasingly speak of the liberation of Palestine and to be unwavering in our support for the resistance. Our unwavering position is what gives us not only moral clarity, but it gives us the moral and ethical strength to continue to say that we are on the right side of history, that our cause is just, and that the liberation of the Palestinian people will come sooner or later. Thank you very much. So, questions. Yes, please. I don't want to stand up. I feel like,
So, as the system degrades, I wonder what you make of the increasing sanction within places like Canada, US here, of their own citizens. So Scott Ritter obviously was going to be at a conference in Russia, got stopped at the airport, passport taken away, apparently on direct order of the State Department. There was that bill that's giving a very vague definition for anti-Semitism that could potentially put people on a watch list, no-fly list, pretty much arbitrarily. You show up on the lawn, you're a terrorist now. I wonder what you make of that and just the increasing crackdown on internal citizens.
I think that you'll continue to see it, and you've seen it before. Of course, we've had different periods of time in our history where that has been increased the people who were not allowed to travel to different sites of struggle. And I think that now, given the international situation, you're going to see it a lot more with those who are going to Russia, those who are supporting Russia. You've seen, of course, we know people who've come back to the US who've been stopped, searched, their phones seized, their computers seized, their electronics seized. For those who don't know, just as a point of information for you all, when you enter the United States through a port of entry, the Constitution is minimal, your constitutional rights. In fact, after 9/11, you basically have no constitutional rights. The border zone is a unique legal zone at which the Customs and Border Protection and Homeland Security have maximal authority. They can seize your phone, they can seize your electronics, you have no choice. And there is no legal recourse outside of changing legislation that can protect you from that. So, these are holdovers of the Patriot Act and of various legislation passed in order to protect Americans from terrorists that we were funding just, a decade before, But, I think that as this repression increases, you're going to see a lot more people speaking out about it. I think it was very, very wise that Scott immediately brought it to the attention of the world, and a lot of people started to discuss it and speak about it and engage with it. I have been on a flight before where I was taken off as I was going to China because I had visited the DPRK, and I was questioned. I almost missed my flight. Questioned me and things.
You did visit North Korea?
Yes. Yes.
Is it nice there?
It's wonderful. I love it. So, I visited the DPRK. I visited a lot of other countries.
Russia?
Of course.
Have you been to Russia?
I have been to Russia. Yes, I was there just a few months ago. And I think that as we continue to do organizing and activism, those who continue to be on the side of resistance forces in all of the poles of the multipolar world will continue to face repression. Not only Russia. Those who go to China are under constant surveillance. Those who support Palestine. Of course, we have many of our comrades and friends, and brothers and sisters in Islamic organizations that continue to be punished by the government, issued travel restrictions, seizing their documents, monitoring their communications. All of this is happening. I think that along with what I showed here, I think we're going to see an increase in repression, which on one side is bad for us, on the other side is a good thing, because as the pressure increases, so too the resistance to that pressure increases, right? So I think that as we're going forward, we're going to see a lot of legal cases coming up. We're going to see a lot of struggles in the courts. We're going to see a lot of demonstrations, activism, press around this. And people are starting to become aware of the government's repressive functions and apparatuses, and starting to make interesting connections with that. That somehow this is related to the mandates, this is related to other aspects, and starting to make bridges and connections to groups that might not have been sympathetic, but are starting to realize that overall we should be fighting against the government's repressive structures and apparatuses as in unity, with all of these other groups that might not agree with us on other issues, but we need to continue to advocate for civil rights and civil liberties. And I think that, I'm a good social studies teacher. I carry the Constitution. I always quiz my students on the Constitution. It's very interesting how a lot of people don't have any understanding of the Constitution. Historically, the Communist Party USA was extremely supportive of the Constitution, had a Civil Liberties Commission, had a Civil Liberties magazine, called Bill of Rights, I believe it was, and they would talk about all of these civil liberty issues. ACLU, in its beginning stages, was doing that, was advocating for people during McCarthyism and things like that, who were on the receiving end of this government repression we're experiencing today, right? So I think that we'll continue to see it, and I think that we continue to have to raise our voice, continue to have to go to the masses, to the press, however we can do it, and continue to say that the government is oppressing its own people. We have the right to learn, we have the right to inquire, we have a right to travel, we have a right to do these things. We're not harming anybody. I want to go learn. What's wrong with that? And if you continue to put the onus on them, why are you constricting me to travel? What do you want to hide? What are you trying to conceal? And why are you afraid? If I go there, if it's so bad, I'll go there, I'll say it's horrible. That's it. Nobody support it. It was horrific. But if I go there and I say that it's great, that's what maybe you fear. Is you begin to throw it in their faces like that, I think we're going to get a lot more sympathy as a result.
Thank you.
Of course. Yes, please.
So you said earlier that the universities are hoarding money.
Mm-hmm.
couldn't that be like used for like free universities for students? And we have student that, my child, they CPS schools don't even put in money for good food and stuff like that. So it's like, I guess we're figuring the Gaza war is a universal, war going on. So I think I like how you put that in, that they're hoarding money. They don't want us to find out.
Of course.
You literally get arrested just for questioning things. So.
Of course. Listen, a lot of these universities have enough money where people could go tuition free forever. Mm-hmm. Given the market and how things go under capitalism, of course, as they are now, they could say we could fund you as long as you want. But they don't do that. They won't do that, right? Because the universities in and of themselves are corporations. They're corporate entities, right? And so they have a responsibility to continue to expand, to advance, to do this, to do that, to continue to dominate the academic marketplace, right? The scholarly marketplace. There are some universities you might not know. There are some universities where their professors will make discoveries. The university already has a patent to that. The professor can't patent it on their own. The university owns the patent to it. And that's how these universities make their money as well, right? So there's absolutely plenty of money. And of course, I advocate for free universal education from the minute a child's born. If they want to learn, they can learn, all the way to, if you want 10 PhDs, I want you to have 10 PhDs. Why not? I want a citizenry that can learn, that can study, that can debate. I long for the School of Athens on a country level, on a national level. I long to debate with somebody in the shop, right? What do you think about this? Boom, start a debate there. And everybody in the line gets involved, right? But we don't have that. Why? Because it's better if a population is ignorant and in the darkness and consumed by a culture that is so vacuous and empty that they are looking at what's the sports, what did this celebrity do, what that celebrity do. I don't give a damn what celebrities are doing. People are dying. People are dying. People are hungry. Kids are sleeping on the streets. What do I care about these celebrities? But they're put there to smoke screen, right? The bread and circus. It's a classic tactic, right? We continue to advocate against that kind of life for a life that is fulfilling, that is holistic, that allows you to be part of something bigger, right? So there's no question that we could offer free education and all of these aspects, free childcare, right, for people, but they don't do it.
It's expensive. I think it's like $300 a month.
Correct.
Yeah.
Where I live, it's $2,000 per child a month. How are you going to live like that? You have to make a salary of 6 figures to afford that, right? But that's where we are. That's where we are. But you know what? I'll tell you one thing. It won't last forever. At some point, it's going to come to a head. The question of what comes the day after is the question for us to figure out, to organize, to advance. Because it could easily go backwards. And I tell my students this every time. There is no guarantee that progress goes in one direction. Who knows? We could go back to feudalism. We could have a whole new aristocratic class that's developing as we see, right? We have to be very cautious. We have to always be at the forefront of struggling, and we have to continue to speak to people. Otherwise, history will pass us by, and we're going to be in situations that might be far worse than what we find ourselves in today. Yes, please.
I've asked myself this question a lot, especially since October 7th, and I know it's virtually impossible to answer, but what does Palestinian liberation actually look like? Because given the two-state solution, essentially has been shot for a while. Israel has nuclear weapons, which is just a completely terrifying thought. But what line would be worth advocating for? Because Palestinian liberation is good. I just want to know what does that materially look like?
So, of course, when we speak of Palestinian liberation, I think we always have to center in the Palestinians in the conversation and what they are advocating for. Some advocate for a two-state solution. We have to recognize that. Fatah and other groups advocate for a two-state solution, and they're happy with the 67 lines. Other groups don't advocate that. Like PFLP does not at all. They have no compromise on that. Islamic Jihad has no compromise on that. Hamas has a little bit interesting history on this issue, right? But I think ultimately Palestinian liberation, first and foremost, is Palestinians to live in safety, security, and justice outside of an apartheid state, right? So the Palestinian liberation does not necessarily mean, at the first instance, a Palestinian state. Because as you rightfully pointed out, materially speaking, if we look at and analyze it, very difficult to see one on the horizon. What are you going to do with 750, 800,000 settlers? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? I talk to my Palestinian comrades all the time. Where are they going to go? So what are we going to do? We're going to kick them all out? And what are you going to do then? Now you have a whole refugee crisis on the other side, right? And what do refugee crises do? They lead to political instability, right? They lead to violence, right? You think they're going to go willingly? They're armed. Ben Gvir and Smotrich keep giving them weapons. If all of them have M16s, what's going to happen, right? So first and foremost, Palestinian liberation is an end to this apartheid structure that exists over all of the land, that we could say the historic Palestine, right? And it's one in which Palestinians can have freedom of movement. They can have all of the freedoms that should be guaranteed under international law. However, in order for that to happen, as you rightfully pointed out, Israel's a nuclear state. They'd have to be partner to that. They'd have to be willing, or they would have to be in a position where they no longer have authority or control or sovereignty over that land. But that seems difficult to think about. Not impossible. Not impossible. There's a crisis within Israeli society, right? But we have not seen yet, except for the example of different situations. For example, the closest that analogy was when the Soviet Union went towards liquidation, right? The fact that all of a sudden all of these nuclear weapons were out there in the fray, people got nervous. They said, oh, we got some in Kazakhstan, some in Belarus, some in Ukraine, some here, some there. Oh, who controls them, right? In that situation, as many American political scientists say, we skirted nuclear apocalypse, right? We came ever so close to a situation. And there are movies, that have been made, like Crimson Tide and things, that bring us close to that, right? But then, no, it didn't happen, right? But there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee in a nuclear world that you will get off scot-free every time, right? So I think that when we think about Palestinian liberation, first and foremost, we have to think about what do Palestinians want. And Palestinians are not united what they want. They are united on a few core issues in terms of the justice within, but they're not united about what the political entity looks like afterwards, right? Two-state, one-state, a confederation that some have advocated for. What does it look like? But ultimately, what that looks like to get to that point, we have a long road. We have a lot of struggle to get to that point. Because Israel is such a powerful country on one side, but is so vulnerable and weak on another, right, at this point. And I think that that's really important to recognize and to bring to the fore. The internal contradictions within Israeli society now have brought it to a crisis unlike any other in its history. It's a young country, right? Very young country, less than 80 years old, right? And so when you look at that, you analyze that, you can realize that it might not last much longer. But what comes after, what kind of entity would be created, we don't know. We don't know. Israeli democracy could end tomorrow, and a fascist government could come to power, a fully militarized one that takes in all of the right-wing forces. We don't know what it'll look like. But Palestinians will continue to struggle, like they've said always, to the last drop of their blood. They won't stop. There are millions of them living there under occupation, right? Where are they going to go? They want Israeli society, right, especially the right wing, wants to make life so brutal, so unlivable, so painful that they leave voluntarily. We don't have to commit ethnic cleansing. We just make life so unbearable for them, they leave anyway. They say, I can't raise a family like this. I can't raise kids like this. But where are they to go? Where are they to go? As some of my Palestinian friends in Gaza have said, we're going to jump in the sea. And then in the sea, they're going to kill us too, right? It's completely surrounded. It's completely surrounded. So this will continue until, I believe, the international community, there's so much pressure from outside that something has to change materially on the ground. And that in concert with resistance within might change the conditions. But the day after, I can't tell you. I can't tell you what the architecture of that looks like. I can tell you what I dream of. I dream of a secular, socialist, democratic state for all the people in that region. A region that can be for everyone, right? A region that can house all the people. There are many Palestinians I know who said, I live with my Jewish neighbor, Mizrahi Jew, who've been here since, Crusade time. No problem. They were fine. The settlers that came were a problem. They brought ideology with them, right? They brought Zionism with them. But there were Jews living there with Muslims under the Ottoman Empire. No problem. People of the book, right? The question is, who wants to live in that kind of society? And I'll tell you that if you have a messianic ideology, if your ideology is in and of itself theologically inclined towards the destruction of the Al-Aqsa compound, right? The rebuilding of the temple, right? To have a third temple, to bring back all of this stuff from some biblical past, that somehow you're granted this land and you can do with it as you will. How are you going to work with these people? How are you going to survive with these people? I don't know. I don't know. And I think it's okay not to know. I think it's okay not to know. We know what we want, but how to get there, all we can do is continue to struggle. All we can do is to continue to struggle and to advocate for Palestinians, right? And history will go in the direction as all of these forces coalesce, eventually something will give. But we have to be there, we have to be involved, because only then can we shape history. If we're not, history will shape itself with the other forces at play. It's a sort of a non-answer, but it's all I have.
Yeah, I understand it's
Yeah.
virtually unanswerable.
It's unanswerable,
But
really.
if it's any consolation, I think Benny Gantz resigned today, so.
Yes, Benny Gantz did.
Yeah.
Benny Gantz did, so we'll see. Political crisis is emerging within. But I'm always nervous about political crises. And you should be too. Because there are a lot of fanatical military officials there that have a lot of fanatical troops that will follow them to the ends of the earth and to the gates of hell.
Just like Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. And until you get rid of those people, what are you going to do? You know? Yes, please.
I just think it's insane how like neocons will say that they're against free healthcare and free education, but they support funding Israel's free healthcare and free education.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Or even our tax dollars go to pay for religious education there, right? Torah study for some of these groups that get funded by the state. So if our tax dollars go to fund the state, our tax dollars are eventually funding people to just sit there and read Torah all day. Read Talmud. I don't mind if you want to read Torah or Talmud all day. Good on you. I don't want it to come out of my paycheck. I have bills to pay. You know, I have more important things to do, right? But that's what we are subsidizing their welfare state, really, at the expense of the American taxpayer.
Right.
That's a problem. That's a problem. It needs to be exposed. It needs to be discussed. We have to talk about it. People don't know. People only think it goes to defense. It doesn't go to defense. It goes to the broad swath of Israeli society, right? It goes to support what I think is a project. I think Eddie had mentioned it, right, about settler colonialism. The DPRK refers to the Zionist entity as an outpost of European colonialism, right? They don't even see it as indigenous in any way, right? I'm sure if we pressed our DPRK comrades, they might say, okay, Jews that were living there before, okay, fine, you know. But those that came afterwards, those that came with an ideology to colonize, which they put in their pamphlet, it's not even a secret. They had fund colonization of Palestine. There it is. We're going. We're building something new, right? That's a problem. How to deal with that? How to you know, and what do you do with the people who were born there now, who feel like the land is theirs? How to address all of these things? I don't know. These are very complex things that have to be discussed within the resistance, within the forces. And even Hamas, even when speaking with Islamic Jihad, all these groups, even Hezbollah, they don't have these kind of fantasies that all of these people will go back. How are you going to send them back? How are they going to go back? They want them to live there, but live under different arrangement, different political arrangement, ultimately. To change their ideology, right? To change, you know, if we have Jews who are not Zionists, what's the big deal? You do your thing, we'll do ours, and we go our ways, right? But you cannot live side by side with a state that wants all of your territory, plus more. Eretz Israel, right? The greater Israel. Wants a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of Lebanon, a little bit of Syria, a little bit of Jordan, a little bit, some even say go all the way to Iraq, right? Well, how are you going to do this, right? Yes, please.
I had a couple of questions, but it's funny that you mentioned what's going to happen to these settlers because I recently read an article about how the Zionist state is purchasing these old Khrushchevskas in Romania to use as housing in case there's like a UN Security Council intervention in Israel that forces them to remove all their settlers.
Yeah.
So they're already anticipating defeat. And not only that, but there's a bill being passed in Congress to allow IDF veterans to benefit from RBA.
Correct?
While our own soldiers are homeless and starving in the streets.
Correct? I think it's an atrocity.
But on my question, I was involved in the encampments all around the Chicagoland area.
Mm-hmm.
I was on and active in 4 of the encampments at SAIC, DePaul, U Chicago, and Northwestern. And Northwestern being the first one. And all of these institutions, they give annually around between like 9 billion on the low end, 12 billion on the high end in investments towards Israel. And the first encampment I was at Northwestern, I know you talked about the more direct forms of state repression using the police, but the neoliberal state also employed this form of repression where they relied on the contradictions inherent within the different diverse ideologies in the encampment to turn certain individuals into compradors and sell out the encampment using DEI as a university policy to eventually use the police to enforce people who came out and supported the students to go home. Certain students that were blatant careerists that basically sold out the encampment just so they could write a book about it later. And even certain Palestinian individuals who were just interested in their own sort of like place here in America and thus securing their own sort of stake in it and trying to get like doctorate contracts like these grad students, right? And it was really bad. I mean, one of the things that the negotiations committee that appointed itself at Northwestern did, for example, is they issued a statement saying that we can't allow straight Muslim men to be on the negotiations committee because they're prone to misogyny and homophobia. And,
Interesting, coming from that grasp.
yeah, and they held secret meetings with the university administration to disperse the Arab and Muslim community that came out in support for them. I mean, one man in my local mosque sold his house to buy the encampment tents. And when I came back to my community after they sold out, my mom was like, "So did you get it?" You know, and I didn't know what to tell her. I was like, everyone in my community, my mosque was asking me, "Well, you know Ahmed, right? He sold his house to buy these kids' tents. Did they win? You know, we put our support behind them. What do they have to show for it?" And I was like, I didn't know what to say. You know, I was just like, we lost. And the best thing we can do is try to help the other encampments. And it's this form of like the state recognizing the contradictions inherent within certain liberal elements within the movement and exploiting that, and self-interested careerist elements and using that to create compradors. The person pushing the compromise, for example, at Northwestern was a Palestinian business professor that was hired by the board of trustees. And seeing that form of just like state repression on my end was just like really eye-opening. And I started doing research, and I found out about the Tides Foundation, funded by it's an NGO arm of the Democrats, funded by George Soros, for example, who have invested in NSJP, JDP within our lifetimes, and interestingly, the PSL too. And just following the money, I noticed that a lot of these people organizing the camps are also funded by the Democrats. And those contradictions, I think, eventually need to come to a head. And I was thinking, what's your take on that? What's your take on the people within our own camp that claim to be pro-Palestinian and anti-imperialist, but are just opportunists, careerists, adventurers, and so forth?
Of course, my experience is, like I mentioned, is to continue to expose them, to continue to bring this to the light. Only then can you really address these issues, right? You can't keep it in the dark. You have to address ultimately, where are you getting funding? Who's backing you? What position do you have on these issues, right? To go and really press them. Because some of these groups that you mentioned are not necessarily for the complete and total liberation of Palestine as other groups are, right? So when we're speaking about two-state, one-state, what does it look like? Some of them are two-staters, absolutely. Some of them are 67 borders, and then we're good to go, right? I think that when you are looking at what do you have to show, right? A lot of the student encampments didn't get much to show. They didn't. Some press, some publicity, some people making a name for themselves in the activist circles and things like that. Some schools did get some achievements, some ability to divest. Some schools advocated for divestment, and they're moving in that direction. I look at it as some struggles end in loss, a reality. especially for us communists. Some struggles end in loss. That's okay, because for us, the loss is temporary, right? We really do believe in an outlook of historical materialism that leads to our eventual victory. At what cost that victory will come, nobody can say. But it will require sacrifice. And whether it's, that famous quote, I think it was from Bertolt Brecht, maybe it wasn't Bertolt Brecht, it was another one now. Try again, fail better, fail again, this kind of idea that you have to continue to do it, right? You have to continue to struggle. And even if you fail, right? And we're always gonna have compradors in our midst. Always. There are always people who are careerists. There are always people who are opportunists. Within our own circles there are. Don't even go far. Don't even go to Tides Foundation and Soros and things like that. Within our own circles, within our own comrades, people I have struggled with for years, there are people who would sell us out on a dime for their own benefit. There are. That's in any movement. We've seen it in the history. For those who have a good understanding, you've seen it, right? We know people who betrayed Lenin, who betrayed Stalin, who betrayed the revolution, right? Who sold out, who went to the opposite side, who defected, storied people who had amazing histories, right? I think that we continue to press ahead, regardless. And I think that what I learned is you no longer even speak of these people. These people are dead. That's what the old party used to say. These people are dead to me. They're gone. They don't even exist anymore for me. I won't even ponder them anymore. We continue to work, regardless of that. And I think to your other point about how to bring about this contradiction, the contradictions are already coming to a head. Regardless of whether we want to address them or not, they're already revealing themselves, right? What happens afterwards? Do we split into multiple organizations? Do we remain united within one? For example, if there's a coalition of groups, how do we deal in coalitions? I think these are all questions for each context and each locality to discuss on their own, because I think that there are diversity within these major organizations, right? I might have a PSL chapter where I am that all 8 people are pro-Hamas. They're like, oh yeah, absolutely, Abu Ubaidah, we'll follow him to the grave, right? But I might go to another where they're like, oh, wait a minute, we are not like that, right? So you have to, as a good materialist, as a good theorist, as a good investigator, you have to figure out what's the context, what's happening here, and then you have to figure out what your plan of action is. I can't come from the top and give you a plan and a strategy for the nationwide. I can't do it. That's why we have local cadres. That's why we have people who go out. That's why we have comrades in all these communities who do different things and push different levels and levers and pull and are able to have different results and different achievements, right? Some fail, some succeed. So it really is getting to know the people that where you're at, getting into those communities, being involved in those communities, building relationships and comradeships of trust and support, and then bringing about airing out these grievances and seeing if you can push people. It's not only that you have to expose them and kick them out. You might, like Eddie said over there, right? Comrade Eddie and a lot of the comrades that we have here, right? You can push people and bring them to our side, right? Simultaneously, you can push their ideology and you can eventually win them over, right? That's ultimately what we want. We can't push everybody away. We're not that big, right? We push everybody away, we're small. We bring them by convincing them that our way is just and correct, right? That ours is the correct path forward, right? That theirs is a dead end. Theirs won't lead anywhere. Go ahead, please.
I also wanted to say, I believe that forming a united front, a broad popular movement of all people, across classes for national liberation of Palestinians and anti-imperialism would be necessary, particularly the proletariat leading it.
Mm-hmm.
All classes moving in solidarity with the proletariat. But when I talked to the students about it on the ground, they were almost hesitant to advance and make inroads and go down to the working class and go down to the proletariat and forward their issues. Them being petit bourgeois themselves, right, and working within a petit bourgeois institution, were almost afraid of the people and the support that they were receiving, to the point where they were willing to go to the police to come in and protect them from the people that came out in support of them. So I'm just wondering, how can we break this liberal conservative paradigm and this divide between these this petit bourgeois class and the working class to come together? Because that's one of the strategies that the Viet Cong forwarded the Weathermen Underground to do during the 60s. and they asked them questions like, what do your parents think about this? And they immediately got mad because they don't have good relations with their parents. And the Vietnamese were taken aback by this, and the people from Cuba also make critiques of this movement, that, you know, these students they don't even have a good working relationship with their parents and families, within their own homes, and within their own neighborhoods. How can they go down to the factories? How can they go down to the people at large and become figures within their community?
How can they run a state?
Yeah.
How can they advance revolution?
Yeah.
How are they going to seize power? Right? No, I think you're absolutely right. I think broad coalitions like this, or popular fronts, however united fronts, are important. They're critical. It happened in every major national liberation struggle. They included wide sections, right? Whether it was in China, whether it was in Vietnam, Iran, wherever it might be, these revolutionary periods had wide support from a variety of sectors, a variety of classes as well, even, of course. There were merchants that bought into some of this stuff because they said it's going to benefit if I bring down the big monopolies, right? If I bring down the big monopolies, my small business will thrive, right? Didn't always end up in a good position later on down the line. That's what constant struggle is necessary, right? But I think to your point about how to deal with this, right? I think that's the importance of really instilling in people the importance of being in their communities and being a participant and being involved, right? Of emphasizing that family life is good, emphasizing that community life is good, that it's a cornerstone of our lives, right? If you live in isolation in an apartment and you are atomized, right? You are in a prison cell of your own mind and your own delusions, and you go out there and you think you can lead a revolution, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're not going to lead anything. You might lead a revolution of one, but you're not leading anything, right? It requires you to go out and meet people and organize and go down to the working class and be able to bring about these issues. I will say that there have been some encampments that have brought labor into it, right? We have to say that there has been some movement for labor for Palestine, but it hasn't been as widespread because you're right. It's much easier to go to students who are already reading theory than it is to go to workers who might not know that theory, and then you have to do extra work to bring them on. And you have to struggle. And you have to struggle with their contradictions, with their issues, right? I was mentioning last night when I was a union SALT, right? When I was organizing, co-workers, homophobic, transphobic, this thing, racist, xenophobic, fuck that guy, fuck these people, fuck those people. What, am I all of a sudden going to say I can't organize with you? You're a reactionary, you're far right, get out of my face. I'm not going to go anywhere. I said, come here, let's go for a walk, let's talk. Why do you feel this way? What drives you, right? And maybe something has happened to them. Maybe they don't know, out of ignorance. I heard it from my pops. I heard it from my coworker. The guys say it at the bar. And you start to work on them, and you start to bring them. It takes time, it takes effort, it's not immediate, right? We live in a society of immediate gratification. Instant results, I want it now, right? You don't get that with organizing. You gotta invest time, days, weeks, months, years to build. Lenin didn't have a revolution in 1917, he started in 1916. He started way before. Organizing way before. Decades of organizing. So that's what we are not capable of. We're not ready yet. Because a lot of people, if it's not instant, if it's not a quick, if it's not a soundbite, I can't do it. We have no roots. We don't stay in one place. A lot of these people you're talking about, they're moving all the time. They're not settled one place, right? We're not like in that generation they were in a community. This is my community. I know my neighbors, I know these people, I know those people. We get together, we talk, we think about things, we discuss. No, who's doing that now for these kind of students? Very few of them are doing that, right? So that's what we can criticize them. If you really want to lead something, you gotta be somewhere. You gotta have connections with people. You gotta struggle long term. People will not fight for you. People will not take a bullet for you if they don't know you. If they don't know your heart, right? I was saying for those of us who are veterans, those of us who served in uniform, right? The reason why somebody would take a bullet for you is because you went through the crucible together. Because you struggled. You went through those experiences together. You suffered. It was painful. It was bloody. But you did it together.
A comrade is who you share a trench with.
Correct. Correct. But if you're not willing to go to the trench, if you're not willing to dig, If you're not willing to be in the blazing sun, filling sandbags, forget about it. It's okay. The revolution of the mind. Enjoy it. Other people will carry out revolution. And it might be the right way. Some of them are ready. Some of them do it. I see these militia movements. Very disciplined. Very disciplined. A lot of them are former military. They come in there and they have a plan. If we want to do something, we have to have a plan. And we have to be ready to be disciplined and organized. Other than that, we're not going anywhere. Come ready.
I think the way you said too, sometimes you don't get that, you don't get the instant transformation, but sometimes people need it takes time, and then sometimes people need to hear it from different voices too. Like, you're sowing the seeds for maybe someone else to come along and help them realize, like I see this with my wrestlers all the time. You teach them a move over and over and over again that doesn't sink in for whatever reason. Then another coach teaches them the same move a different way, and they figure it out. And they come back to you and they're like, look at this cool move I learned. Like, I've been trying to tell you that for a year, but okay, I'm glad you listened to this other coach. But sometimes that's what it takes, it takes a different voice. So you might be working on someone, you might not see instant change, but then someone else comes along and says things in a little bit of a different way that makes sense to them, and it clicks, and you're kind of sowing the seeds in a way for future growth, I feel like.
I think you're absolutely right. You see it in kids. For those of us who have kids or things like that, I might tell my kids to do something. They ignore me, and then they go to school, and they're like, "Oh, I did this." I'm like, "I told you. What do you mean?" So you're right. You don't. But that's the importance of community, then, right? That's the importance of having a group of people, or even a much broader swath of the population. That then this person can talk to you, listen to you. Maybe they have to go somewhere else. Maybe they're on another journey. Maybe they're doing something else. They're traveling. And they meet somebody else who also is like you, also is of the same perspective, and then they're able to say it in a little different way, maybe more eloquently, maybe a little bit more rough and tumble, and they're able to get it, and it clicks, right? Or it adds. The seed sprouts, but it's not yet ready, right? It takes time, it takes an effort, right? It really does. If we have to get out of the idea that everyone in this room is like a Che Guevara. We're not. We're not. Only at a time of tremendous upheaval will one or two or three emerge from within that midst. Right now, we all have to be good worker bees. That's it. We're ants in the colony. That's it. We're workers bee. We do our part, we do it well, and we hope that our other comrades are also doing the part to ensure success. Right? And everybody trusts one another to ensure the stability and the advancement. That's it. That's all we can do. But if everybody's out there that I'm going to do it, that somehow I'm going to lead it, that somehow I'm the best theorist, I've read the books, good luck. Revolution of one, right? And that's why we haven't been successful yet. We haven't been successful. But when grandmas and grandpas, when uncles and aunts in all of our mosques and our communities, right, come out with a Palestinian flag, and they say, I'm ready to fight, I'm ready to sacrifice, right? I've heard it amongst my brothers and sisters, right? In the Ummah. We're ready. That's when you start to see change. That's when things change. When ordinary people get up and say, I have bare chest, take me, I'm ready to go, right? I'm ready to sacrifice it all. Only then is it going to change. Only then can you really enact. Only when the people in the Donbass got together and said, we are fighting against these fascists. We're not going to allow them. No pasaran. United together, they formed structures, they formed disciplined armies, and they were able to stop the fascists in their tracks. If they were not organized, they would have been plowed over. I would say, had they not had the Soviet experience, they would have been plowed over. There would have been no salvation for them. But they knew already within their DNA, they already had seen those structures before. They were ready. They were ready to go. They said, we're going back to the original. So we have a lot of work to do, comrades. We have a lot of work. But it's okay. Work is good. Work is good. Struggle is good. Some of us will last long in the struggle, some of us might not. Some of us will be persecuted, others might not. Whatever happens, united, forward, backwards never. That's it. Thank you. Let's eat.
And to communicate. Let's get social.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, it went longer than I thought. I'm happy with all of it.
Give me a hug.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, nuclear war